So in today's video we will be talking about some more React Redux hooks, that is useSelector and useDispatch. We already have a video on the useSelector hook, so you can check that out if you haven't, and you have to like that video and you also have to subscribe to our channel because we bring to you React.js videos for beginners on a daily basis. So we always think of taking it from the basic, so that first of all you can build up your basics and then you can work on. So today we will be talking about the use dispatch hook. So working with React, and then we have proceeded to working with Redux and React Redux. So apart from being a great state management tool, Redux can be a little tedious at the beginning with the boilerplate or the setup code. That doesn't help at all to understand the data flow of the application. So this is one problem. And even when you get used to writing the extra amount of code, you might keep asking yourself, why so much preparations for something that is supposed to make my code run faster and cleaner? So for that we will be doing the simplicity and code extractions that the hooks allow. So first of all we will be learning about the useSelector and useDispatch. So we have already discussed about the three main components. The provider, so we know that there are some imports that will be the connection between the Redux and our application. First one is the provider, which will serve as the component bridge between the Redux store and our entire app. So we are going to wrap the app component with this component provided to us from the React Redux library. This component will have a property called store. So by convention, and the value of this property is going to be the entire Redux store contained inside a variable called store by convention. You can name it whatever you want to. And it is going to be equals to the function createStore. CreateStore is also from a React Redux library that will accept a reducer as an argument. We are going to be in charge of creating the reducer, which is nothing more than a function that takes two arguments, the current state, and the actions returns the new state. The parameter current state needs a default value, which is the initial structure of the store, and for that we will create the object called initial state, and we will assign all the parameters to the initial value. In our case we will be setting up the counter component to 0. We have already discussed all of this in some of our previous videos, but you do remember actions and the dispatch of actions. So I hope that use dispatch brings you that dispatching function back into your mind, and you might connect that something it is being related to the action. So now let's tackle the action. So an action is just an object that always contains the type of logic that is going to be executed on the state. It can be a string that we can name it as we want, but the convention asks us to name it according to whatever it is defined, and the payload or data that is coming from the action. So we use the switch case to write our actions. We have already seen that, and we can insert both the current state and the action in the reducer function, and our logic will be good to go. So this is the simple React Redux code, no hooks till now. But how are we going to change the things? So the code extraction of writing Redux code and make possible to read and dispatch data from the store is a lot easier from any functional component. So first of all, I will tell you about the useSelector in very short. So the useSelector is a function that takes the current state as an argument and returns whatever data we want from it. It is very similar to map state to props. We have a separate video on map state to props where we have talked about each and every detail about the map state to props function and how it can be customized. So do check that out if you haven't. Map state to props is very similar to useSelector. useSelector allows us to store the return values inside a variable within the scope of the functional component instead of passing down as props. Now, to dispatch an action to the store by importing useDispatch and implementing it to the scope of the functional component. So useSelector and useDispatch both are functions that we will import from the React Redux library and assign it to a variable. And with this, we will be able to dispatch any action to the store by simply adding an action as an argument to the new variable like the code. The equivalent of map dispatch to props is useDispatch. We will invoke useDispatch and store it to a variable dispatch. Dispatch will work with the actions imported from the actions file, and then it will dispatch whatever actions are coming into the app, whatever are being called. Dispatch will take the object and it will look through the reducer that matches the action type, and then the Redux and React will work on that basis. Now let us go ahead and look at an example and try to understand about the useSelector and useDispatch. Also, the React Redux hook useSelector and useDispatch are implemented in the React app, but they are compared to the connect function alternative. It makes the code cleaner and more organized. So now let's jump into our example. So I'm inside my components folder and have created a file counter.js. So we will be using the useDispatch hook and we will be creating an increment and decrement button. We have done this a lot of times, but we will be using a different approach this time of the useDispatch. So let us start by importing React from React and next we are going to import useDispatch and useSelector from React Redux. So we are going to create our function counter. So export default function counter. Or you can just write function, and then at the end we can export that. So here we are going to create a const counter and assign it to useSelector. Here the state is assigned to state dot counter, and next our const dispatch is assigned to useDispatch. Now we will be creating two functions, that is handle increment and handle decrement, and then we will be adding buttons according to that, which will have the on-click function of handle increment and handle decrement. So const handle increment and assign it to dispatch. Here we will assign the type to increment. Similarly, we will be creating handle decrement. So const handle decrement and then dispatch with the type decrement. Now we will add the return. Firstly, we will wrap everything inside one div, and then we will add an h1 which says introduction to useDispatch hook. Now we will be adding one more h1 which will display the number of the counter. So counter, and then we will display the counter. Now we will add a button and an on-click function which is assigned to handle decrement. And this button will say decrement. After this we will add another button with an on click of handle increment. And this will say increment. We can also add custom stylings to these buttons. So first let us do the basic coding, and after that we will look onto this. Now we will be creating a root reducer inside our store folder. So inside my store I will create a file named root reducer.js. Here we will initialize the counter and we will add the root reducer. So const, also in the counter.js we will be exporting that because we have removed the export default statement. So export default counter, and this is root reducer, so we will rename it to root reducer. So here we will be creating the initial state and the counter will be set to 0 initially. Now we will write the function root reducer. Root reducer takes two inputs, that is state and action. So the state here will be assigned to the initial state, and next is the action. We have two actions, increment and decrement. Now we'll be writing the switch case. So the switch takes action dot type, and we will be writing our cases here. So first case is increment. Increment is going to return counter, and that is assigned to state dot counter plus 1. Next is the case of decrement. This is going to return the counter where state dot counter is subtracted by 1. Lastly, we will add the default case. Now we will be adding the default case. So in the default, we will just return the state, and lastly we will export default the root reducer. Now moving on to display our component, we are going to add the provider and some things inside our app.js. So inside my app.js we are going to remove all this and we will just keep simple functional component. So here we will be adding our component, that is counter, and it is not going to take auto import, so we will do the hard coding. So we will import counter from components.counter. Now we will be going to the index.js file and we will be adding some of the things. So first of all we will be creating the store. So const store through the create store method. will pass the root reducer here, so it will auto import root reducer, and then we will wrap the app component inside provider. So we'll just remove this and we will add the provider, and the provider store is assigned to the store. So that was all about the coding, and let us just see our output here. You can add custom stylings and you can keep all of these codes differently in your GitHub repository. You can keep updating your repository, you can keep pushing all this code to GitHub, so that you can add all of these inside your projects or your resume, or you can have a link where you keep all your projects and you can go through them. And for proper coding, you can add comments in all of your code, so that whenever you open your code, you get to know that what you were exactly doing. You do not forget this thing later on when you. Okay, so this is not the output that you were expecting. Yeah, so you can see introduction to useDispatch hook, and the counter is currently 0, and we have a decrement button and we have an increment button. You can add styling to this, you can add a color to the buttons, you can add anything you want, but the basic thing is that sorry, the basic thing is that we are going to do the same thing using the useDispatch hook. So there are a lot of things, there are a lot of functions in React that you can use to do the same thing in different ways, like adding, incrementing or decrementing the counter component is a simple task, but we have done the same task using so many functions, and you have seen so many alternatives to do the same task. So this will help you in building any project according to that. So whenever you're building one project and something is causing an error, so you will always have an alternative where you will try to think that how can this thing be done using some simple method. So whatever will be simple, what will be compatible, that you will be using along with your project. So that was it about useDispatch hook, and that's it for today's video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we bring to you React.js videos for beginners on a daily basis. So I'll see you in the next video.